a rich man's world. I have turned the soul of this beautiful land, but that beauty, a rich man's world. I have turned the soul of this beautiful land, but a rich man's world. I have turned the soul of this beautiful land, but that beauty, a rich man's world, a rich man's world, beautiful land, but a rich man's world. I have turned the soul of this beautiful land, but a rich man's world. I have turned the soul of this beautiful land, but that beauty, a rich man's world, a rich man's world, beautiful land, but a rich man's world. I have turned the soul of this beautiful land, but
Welcome to Struggle Up. It's Black History Month, and I'm Malik, and this is thotscholar. And today we're going to be discussing Ida B. Wells-Barnett and the myth of the universal class of woman.
Right. So, you know what I've been thinking about recently?
What you been thinking about?
Okay. So I've been thinking about the conversations that are being had all the time now, it seems, on Twitter, around consent, around rape culture, these concepts that have sort of found their way into the popular lexicon. I've experienced like a lot of cyber harassment lately around these issues. The flying out shit was one of the most recent ones, and I normally don't get involved in the fray, because I'm partnered, so obviously so I don't really be getting into the little circular dating conversations that happen, but that one was interesting to me because of the conversation around it, and I'm writing a longer piece on it for Substack. So
Excuse me.
I'm gonna get into it in that piece. I'm not gonna go too far into it on this episode or whatever, but my experience made me think of Ida B. Wells and the fact that she highlighted that Black women also deal with mob violence and differing levels and similar violence as Black men.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very surprised to see her mentioned in Manning the Race by Marlon Ross, right?
Mm-hmm. So in my opinion, it's one of the reasons why she doesn't get mentioned a lot is because she campaigned on behalf of she's seen as a race, as a fighter for the race, which fighting for Black men, and that's not really a popular thing. It wasn't back then, and it kind of isn't now.
Yeah, a lot of people don't really, just like a lot of people kind of reduce Rosa Parks to, she's sitting on the bus, she sat down, and they don't really know the thing that it does around the Rosa Parks thing is that it reduces it to, she just sat down and it just so happened that she became a fighter, but that's not really what it is.
They planned that.
Yeah,
it
was planned. And the person it actually happened to originally was Claudette Colvin, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she's not
still alive.
Yeah, she's not really given the credit or talked about. There's 1,000,001 books written about Rosa Parks, but ain't nobody gonna write about no Claudette Colvins because she was a poor or working class,
15-year-old
yeah,
who refused to give up a seat, and they didn't want that to be the face of. And this is what I mean when people like.
She was also darker skinned.
She's also dark skinned, whereas everybody. I don't know if you've ever seen Rosa Parks, but Rosa Parks is very, 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 very light skinned. So,
I thought she was high brown.
No, she's not high brown.
She's light skinned.
She's super light. She was super light skinned.
The black and white photos make it really hard to.
But
tell.
I seen when she got her congressional medal from Obama, she was like ridiculously light skinned. And then, in that. Claudette Colvin was a victim of respectability politics. And this is why it's ignorant when people say, black folks say, oh, well, you know, we wasn't doing XYZ back in the day. You wouldn't know because they our black elites made sure that shit did not get put in our history books. Mm-hmm. So we don't really know. We just have, and then like it gets repeated, you know, on down but if you have a grandma or been to any type of church gossip and heard old ladies talking, that's never been true. Same that stuff's been going on now. It goes on in not just our community, but every community. It's very
interesting to me. Several things are interesting to me, but the two most interesting things to me about the Rosa Parks Claudette Colvin thing is that people think that mentioning Claudette Colvin and the respectability behind it makes it what Rosa Parks did less, or that it mars what, you know, it takes away from what she did, so to speak. I don't think that it does, because Rosa Parks wasn't deciding that by herself.
No.
It was an organization. And I think that it's also like the narrative does multiple things at once by erasing Claudette Colvin, but also by making it seem like Black people don't organize or don't have like strategies. There's no logic to these things. We just in a fit of emotion and sass. And yeah.
Rosa Parks decided to, you know,
and
tell this random white bus driver that I've been working too hard today and I don't feel like getting up. And that was the end. Like, no.
That, and then also like, what was I going to say? The fucking, the whole situation too, like when you learn about Rosa Parks in school, they don't tell you about her anti-rape activism either. Nope. I did not learn about that until I was an adult.
I had to read her biography that she oversaw, that she wrote by proxy, and that's when I found out that her and her husband for like 25 years, from the time when they first were newlyweds onto their middle age, they were running, in their own neighborhood, they were running an anti-rape activism, giving
she was
care,
like a PI.
Yeah, giving care to rape victims, finding out who did what in her own neighborhood and tracking down, you know, clues and doing what the police, because you know, she had to, because in the neighborhood she served, the police wasn't doing that.
Because white men were coming.
Right. And they didn't have rape kits either. So she would make sure that these girls would get justice, and her husband would make sure that these girls get justice, and her husband was there to assist and also act as security, because Rosa Parks was like 5'2". So
really?
You know what I'm saying? Like, she was a small woman.
She looked tall. She has tall.
She stood next to Obama and
big nigga energy.
She stood next to Obama and barely stood up to his shoulders. This is one of those short, firebrand women. But y'all be sitting here, you know, notorious RBG though.
Nah, the thing that's killing me right now, and I know I'm about to sound like mad ignorant or whatever, but I didn't even, like, you saying that she stood next to Barack Obama, like, and I'm sitting here like, wait, she was still alive? Because, you know, like, they be putting in black and white pictures and making us think everybody was dead.
She died in 2011 or something. It was like during his pregnancy. During his presidency, she passed away.
They talk about all of these figures like they're already dead.
Yeah, history is my thing. So like she died during his presidency. What is wrong with me? And
pregnancy.
She was still around for a while. I think she died in like, I want to say 2014, something like that. 2012.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. So like, Did her time? Did it overlap with Ida? No, that was a long time. That was way before. Because
Ida B. Wells died when Rosa Parks was probably a teenager.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. At the time, the
Ida B. Wells died in 1931.
Because I know Ida knew Du Bois.
That nigga lived a long time.
He lived forever. He was like 200 years old when he died.
He died at the age of 99 in 1963.
He died at the age of 176. Looking up.
Or no, he was over 100.
He lived to 100. He did.
He was born in 1862 and like died in like 1964, some shit like that.
I don't want to live that long. I don't see how motherfuckers be. You know what I'm saying? Like, you be talking about
that's
don't
my daddy,
talk like that.
That's my daddy lifetime. That's my daddy lifetime. That's my grandmother's lifetime. That's her parents' lifetime. We should have never met. Sadly, this comedian, he passed recently last year.
What?
Yeah, he passed last year. And
wasn't he only like in his 40s? His 30s?
He was in his 50s, and like early 50s, barely, and he died. And he had a joke, and he said that, you know, him and his Uncle Joe, they wanted him to come to the funeral, and he was like, I don't know no damn Uncle Joe. He was like, and he went to, he ended up going to Uncle Joe's funeral, and somebody gonna have the audacity to cry out. He was going too soon. And he said, too soon. Uncle Joe is 105. Me and this nigga should have never met. He should have died 30 years ago.
I would never forget you telling me that shit. And even though I heard it secondhand, it was
that
so
shit
funny.
was fucking hilarious. I was weak for weeks.
We should have never met.
I should have never met Uncle Joe. He should have been dead 30 years ago. And that shit was funny.
Let's get into it. Man in the Race.
So, in Man in the Race by Marlon B. Ross, reforming black men in the Jim Crow era. This gets into how African American men are marketed, embodied, and imaged for the purposes of racial advancement. So, basically, how black people have take control of their image, and how they present themselves to the world in order to earn, you know, some semblance of respect, not just from white people, but respect from other black people, respect from other races, so they can earn some semblance of self-respect and feel good about themselves in the midst of negative imaging and stereotypes.
And this was really big. The advent of the camera was a really big thing for us, which is why remember I told you, I read, about the history of the crops and things in slavery and how we only ever really see cotton and cane and sugar cane. But in reality, there was a whole wide variety of crops, and cotton didn't become popular until the mid to late 1700s, the 18th century. And the pictures that we see were taken after slavery a lot of the time, which is why they're wearing overalls and wearing different gendered clothes and different things like that. It's because they were sharecroppers.
We don't have film of slaves.
We have some. There are some, but it's not nearly as many as the camera wasn't advanced enough.
It's really rare,
and they weren't wasting that time.
Right, and nobody was going down to the hot South and with a daguerreotype, which is the predecessor of the camera, the daguerreotype, which is the predecessor of the camera, and have slaves that could be working sit still for 10 hours so you can get a shot. No, because then you have to pay the owner for the work that they didn't get done. So nobody's doing that. So there's very few factual pictures of actual slavery. What we do have is plenty of pictures of sharecroppers. And that's not from the 1800s. It spans from the 1910s all the way through the 30s and 40s. You know, the same age as some of y'all grandparents. So, realistically, slaves were not gendered, and the women wore the same thing as the men.
Well, I wouldn't say they weren't gendered. Horton Spiller says ungendered, but then also they a lot of the time, because slaves were viewed as movable property and chattel, so kind of like in between human and animal, so parahuman.
The first thing slave women did,
they were assigned to different sort of roles according to the culture that owned them.
Yeah, but if you worked in the fields, the first thing slave women did for their dress. I don't know if anybody, because if you're not growing tobacco, slaves also grew rice, corn, and all type of other agricultural products. And I don't know if anybody else has worked in a field or walked through long grass, any of that stuff. If you have a long dress on, the first thing you're gonna do is cut it up the middle and tie the ends around your legs to give you better mobility, which is what they did. And Harriet Tubman talked about ripping her sleeve, rolling her sleeves up, and how she could move a horse-drawn wagon by herself. They were not wearing, it's impractical. It just doesn't make any sense.
She was living a hard life, not a soft life.
But, a lot of historians, tend to deal, I don't know if it's on purpose, but a lot of them tend to deal in presentism when they talk about, slave male and female relations as if, it's today, but it's not.
Yeah.
But getting back to this,
I marked the page.
These talks a lot about a lot of the myths we get about what the Black people back in the day were looking like come from Black people back in the day taking control of their image in the media and what type of story they wanted to tell to those watching, usually white. And for this, the Black body as uplift instrument, the personal narratives of Ida B. Wells and Taylor Gordon says, Black women are subject not only to sexual assault under Jim Crow strictures, but to outrages of mob violence and lynching usually associated primarily with Black men. The defense of the race is just as dangerous an affair for Black women. And in this period, the defense of the race, the defense of Black manhood, and the defense of Black women are tightly interwoven with the problem of an individual's literal self-defense. So
skip over here, I think.
Where women are subjected to racial violence, are as subjected to racial violence as men, women must be equally prepared for self-defense. While she is cognizant of the ways United States culture attempts to situate women differently in relation to strength, violence, and self-making individualism, she insists on a narrative paradigm that equates women's capacity for self-defense with men's. To me, this reads as common sense, or the popular term of, it's common sense to do X, Y, Z to protect yourself.
Mm-hmm.
We know what should be, but this is what you have to do. Should Black women be subject to mob violence in the 1800s? No, but they were. So they had to take precautions and to protect oneself.
Ida B. Wells carried a gun.
Ida B. Wells carried a gun.
Had a lot of
Harriet Tubman carried a gun.
Let me see.
Mary Coach, what was her name? Mary Tyler Williams carried a gun. She worked on the She worked on the train. She was a coach woman, and she carried a rifle. It was customary for Black women to carry items to protect themselves because white men like to try it.
What Ross is highlighting too is that Ida B. Wells' narrative and how she saw herself, how she wrote about herself, how she presented herself, it challenges this narrative of masculinity as far as like looking, like the frontiers, the westward expansion and different, like the hero aspect of things, self-determination and things like that. It challenges the hegemonic paradigms that state that women are meant to be in the home and are meant to be in private and, domestic, while men are meant to be in public and are meant to be political. And this is something that was very deliberate on her part, I feel, because she was middle class. She was a teacher. And so this is something that she strove to disrupt in her very existence. And, she was teaching, she was pushed out of teaching because she complained too much about the facility. We didn't have about the lack of resources, about the facilities, about like different things like that. And it was unbecoming of a woman, right? And like they had this idea of what a proper woman was supposed to do, what a proper woman was supposed to be like. And Wells just like, she worked to kind of like spotlight this sort of inconsistencies and all of this behavior. And it was very taboo what she was doing at the time. And she represented because she was pushed out and, like, in the process of protecting the schoolwomen, it says her own high principles and the reputation of Black womanhood as a whole, she was pushed out. And, in her autobiography, she represents teaching as the prostitution of the mind and flesh that Black women must make to survive and get ahead. And because she refuses such compromises of spirit and flesh, she I hate this word, dog.
Serendipitously
finds her home in journalism instead, an unconventional woman's profession. So she's, instead of like compromising her beliefs and everything, she felt so strongly about this. This is the principle of the thing, okay? She left teaching and decided to become a journalist, which was a very dangerous job for her. in the end, remember they set the they set that place on fire in Memphis, though. She couldn't come back to Memphis because they set that shit on fire, the newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
And, she moves to journalism because she doesn't have to submit to authority there. And I guess I connect with her on a certain level because that's something that I did by moving into either sex work or writing or any type of other creation that I've done, because I don't want to compromise my principles and my values to a certain extent, right? And so she talks about how she read all the time and she's, she's like thinking all the time. And, then we get to talking about the railroad in her autobiography. And it says here, Ross writes, if she is not a conventional lady, it is because white racists refuse to let her play that role. Again and again, she comes to the defense of the Black race because no one else, no Black man, seems to be in exactly her place at a time when a right needs protecting. This is another way of saying that her racial oppression ironically opens up an opportunity for her to act against and above gender strictures through racial trespassing, which for her necessarily also implies gender trespassing. This is something that's constantly in negotiation when we discuss all these dating things and, the Twitter wheel, the Black Twitter wheel of fortune of dating.
Topics.
Dating. Is this a date 50-50 and all of that, all of these discourses, they seem silly and sometimes they are, but they're also a renegotiation to me of these racial sexual boundaries. And a lot of the time you'll hear people who kind of take Kimberly Crenshaw's sort of line on intersectionality, the juridical intersectionality, and they will say that, well, Black men are only affected by racism, but Black women are affected by racism and sexism. But here in this book and in other narratives, we see again and again that both Black men and women are affected, all of us, all Black people are affected by racial, sexual stigma and strictures in whatever era we're in. By her going onto the train and sitting in a white lady's car, she was trespassing racially and was and it highlights how she was disincluded or unincluded from the category of woman and lady as well as white.
So back in the day, when you ride the train, you're taking a train from New York City to Buffalo, for example, Black people, regardless of gender, would have to get into the colored car. So there was no separation of gender for Negroes. And what this implicitly says is that we don't have one. White men get to be men. White women get to be ladies or women, whatever. But we are together. We are the Negro, which is why I don't understand how people look back and be like, oh, well, she was just doing all this fighting for these men, when in reality she was fighting for herself.
They don't, a lot of the time, like I said, we only learn certain things in school. So I don't think a lot of people learn about the train incident and things like that or whatever. We didn't read these people's autobiographies in school. I read those on my own time. You know what I'm saying?
Bathrooms, actually, this is a good point, because bathrooms actually were not ungendered as well for Black people. It said white man, white woman, colored. There's only 3 rooms.
Oh, so yeah, that's right.
Black women, they focus on Black men a lot, but Black women also had to go into the same bathroom that the Black men did, because they could not go into the white woman's restroom.
Mm-hmm.
We lived like this for years, and this is decades and centuries. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the reasons why the fighting against the hatred for transgender women in some circles, or transgender men in some circles, and this did the hatred that Zaya Wade gets. Y'all want to be. When you fight for in this day and age, it seems like when you fight to disinclude them and say they're fucking shit up, what exactly are they fucking up? Exactly. We weren't never really allowed to be men in that situation. Speaking for people with my body type, because that's what your experience with racism is dictated by, as a Black person, what genitals you have and what you present, what they see you as.
Right.
And so even though as I started to identify as non-binary, I decided that as that's my personal only, and to still go by he him because it kind of doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things.
For me, when I look at this story, it really makes me think, because like I said, we didn't learn about this in school, so it really makes me think about the narratives that we have about people, these historical figures and whatever, because they are not here to speak for themselves and they have their stories written down. We may not read them in school. We may not know a lot of Black history. And a lot of the Black history we know, because I know a lot of the time people will say, well, you know, like in Black history, you know, like it's very masculinist, you know, and everything like that. But they also don't bring up the class aspect of it. Oh. We know so many of these women's stories, you know, because they're in this time period because they were elites.
Mm-hmm. Harriet Tubman had to fly to get into the history books.
Basically.
And, you know.
Well, I think, too, it was that they couldn't not include her because she was also an activist, kind of like Sojourner Truth.
She had to be the top. She had to be the top, little tip of the iceberg type of activist. Like
white people had to remember her.
Right. Whereas,
because they read the history.
Whereas why, if not for
abolitionists,
if not for Wells' class, she'd have been forgotten about. Well, her daughter, they tried. They really tried.
They
her
really
daughter
did
was
try
like,
to forget her. Her daughter was not going.
Fuck out here. Y'all gonna remember my mother.
35 fucking years trying to find
somebody to publish her mother's autobiography.
Like,
which is why we know who Ida B. Wells is today.
And part of the reason too, I'm telling you, because like, okay, for instance, a lot of people don't know this about Ida B. Wells, but before her friend was lynched, who she knew was innocent because he was married and she knew him, right? Well, people are like, maybe she didn't really know him, dude. You know what I'm saying? She knew him and she knew his wife, and he was lynched and accused of raping a white woman. And before that happened, they would all sit around and be like, I don't know, I feel like that nigga did it.
Which tells you exactly what her class situation is.
Yeah.
Because poor Black women wasn't doing that.
And then like they would sit around, they would be like, you know, I don't know, like, you know, like, I feel like, you know, like he might be guilty. And, you know, like it wasn't that they didn't believe that, because like sometimes people will look at, you know, her activism and nowadays, because everything is, you know, there's this presentist, revisionist sort of like thing going on. And it always happens. They double back and try to like rewrite what actually happened. But they kind of paint her work as though she was just riding so hard for Black men, when in reality, she witnessed violence and felt that shit very close to home and decided to rethink her position because she just knew that her friend did not do that shit. And people were like, and she was surrounded by other people who were like, why are you fighting for these men? You don't know, they might actually be rapists. And she was like, pointing out the inconsistencies, and she you know, like the Red Record and everything and Southern Horror, she wrote down all of these different cases and pointed out inconsistencies and documented this shit. And Black people were pissed off. She went
to these places and
because a lot of these Black men they were lower class, they were working, like they weren't, and then every once in a while there would be a prominent Black man who was lynched and everything. And
then these, hey, Ida, can you go and see what happened? Oh, now you want me to go see what happened? Like,
it was believed very strongly, not just by white people, but indoctrinated beliefs by, you know, Black people believed that Black men wanted white women so bad that this we're not gonna fight around this because, you know, it makes us look bad, or this, you know, he probably did it, and things like that. And whatever. It was very, so like her being on the train car and put him in this narrative that is talking about where she's fighting. She wasn't just fighting for Black men. She was fighting for Black women and to be recognized as a woman, as a lady, because she was middle class and also because she was Black. So there's like class, there's race, there's sex, there's gender, there's all these factors. She dressed in the right way for her time. She was originally a teacher. You know, you have all of these sorts of things, and she forms this identity where she speaks out all the time, and she's not going to let people silence her. And she also decided that she, to carry a gun with her because she was like, I'm going to take care of myself. I have a right to self-defense. And that's something that you also don't really see as much nowadays. It's kind of like women are kind of leaning back into these
because
sort of soft life.
It's because
super feminine roles.
they're trying to do the same thing but they don't see it. I don't know if they see it that way. But when you're sitting here trying to, saying as a black woman that leaning the other way and into the same stereotype of black women are, do everything for everybody and black women are mules and so I deserve a soft life. It's almost like, our fathers are not dropping dead from overwork. Like, it's almost like we weren't right there out, with y'all on the plantation. Or you feel like as men, we supposed to work ourselves to death. And you know what I'm saying? It's like you trying to reify when you try to reify and lean into this womanhood thing, it justifies the stereotype or makes the stereotypes true. And we're still where Ida B. Wells is and trying to prove how much of a man we are, how much of a woman we are. Hustle culture hustle culture came out and all these men was like, yeah, you need to have 3, 4, 5 hustles and passive income and all of this stuff.
Dying
instead
from
of like,
overwork and shit.
Hey, how about your job pays you enough to live on? How about that?
Right.
And instead of doing that, it was
financial
a whole bunch
literacy.
of hustle culture became this thing. And we are doing the same thing we did over 100 years ago with financial literacy. I looked it up. They were trying to teach ex-slaves who had nothing financial literacy instead of just giving them money.
Because they didn't think we were smart enough to handle our own money.
And we're still here, and we are still here.
Well, the thing that's crazy to me is that they kind of remember. I told you my grandma was born in '46. In East Texas, okay? Her mother was a sharecropper. Her mother's parents were sharecroppers, okay? So we came out the South kind of late compared to some other people's families. Your
My
family
grandfather
was
a sharecropper.
You know what I'm saying? But you guys have more, because your mom had you when she was 30, so you have more of land. But my grandmother was in her 20s when she had my mother was her last child. She had her at 24. And I had my son at 22, my first child. And my mother had me when she was 20. And then, she had 3 of us by the time she was 24 as well. And so, it seems as though this history is very far away, right? But my grandmother was a child during massive resistance of the 50s. She was an adolescent toward the end of the 50s and into the 60s when she moved up north and everything. That was during the civil rights movement, and she had children by then. And I remember my mom asking her, like, why didn't you march for our freedom and what were you doing and all of that? My grandmother never got a college degree. She was working class and she was one of the last, of a dying breed who could work their way up she did data entry and different shit at GM. You can work her way up from there and made really good money and was able to take care of her kids and everything like that. She was a breadwinner. She remarried when my mother was an adolescent or a young teenager, and she made more than her husband, and he had an allowance. You know what I'm saying?
A good one.
He said, I remember then talking about how he saved up his allowance and bought a Cadillac before I was, he died when I was 6, but I remember riding that motherfucker and her talking about it. And the thing is that, my grandma was always, into like self-determination and things like that as well. Growing up working class, she was the one who taught me about being safe around men and strangers. And, if my friends act a fool, you always make sure I have $50 in my pocket and always make sure I have my ID and shit like that and whatever, because, to be safe. And, I say that because I want to get into this section here where, Wells, like she was really into like taking care of herself and making sure that, like she, like self-defense basically, and making sure that, she's like, I'm black, I'm a woman, I'm still a woman if I protect myself. And so it says, Ross writes here, although Wells' capacity to take care of herself might be taken as a comment on the new Negroes and the new woman's strength, it must also be taken as an implicit criticism of both women and black men who have failed to conduct themselves accordingly. In case we miss the criticism, she makes it explicit. None of my people had ever seemed to feel that it was a race matter and that they should help me with the fight. And she's talking about her fight against lynching. Now, remember when I brought up that shit about child support? not actually going to the mothers, and how it's a police abolition and reproductive justice issue. And everybody came in behind me to tell me that I was fighting for black men and I didn't care about black women and children, even though the lower 50% of the black population, the women in that lower 50% are not seeing all of the money that they could be seeing because the state is taking it.
The state takes every year $1.2 billion of child support that's supposed to go to the mothers.
Interest. They charge
interest. Okay, so...
And it does not go to the mother.
Real quick, this is where the disconnect comes in for those that think she's fighting for child support. Of course, you would agree. Whoa. Okay. Men would not have problems with child support if child support actually went to the kids. And...
Well, I don't know how.
Well, yeah, there's always going to be raggedy people.
Would still have a problem.
And just like this, couple of mothers out there that don't represent the total that's out here spending, big kid milk money on getting them some new sneakers and nails and done or whatever. But the problem is that like child support will come out your check, right? And you call your baby, they come out your check. Baby mother call you talking about I need some da-da-da-da. And he's like, child support already came out. Like, what are you talking about? Child support can take up to 70% of your check or 90% of your check if you're in arrears and keep 60% of that shit or more. It just depends on what state you in and what they feel like charging you that month. So if they could take $200 from you and give her $60. Now you out $200 and don't have any extra to give her. Now y'all beefing.
Yeah.
Family broken up.
And the thing is that like it'll come up and people will be like, well, you shouldn't rely on the state to replace parents and everything like that. And I don't want to be rude about like broken families and shit like that and how niggas was raised poorly. But I will say this. It's not just about like, oh, we don't want the state to replace, because nobody wants the state to replace, because this thing that they're doing where it's disconnected from foster care and child welfare needs examining. It's definitely, all of those things are definitely connected. We're definitely full into a genocide.
Foster care, child welfare,
we've seen this,
and child support.
We've seen this happen.
Is an unholy triangle.
We've seen this happen already with indigenous people, right? Where they're starting to strip away sovereignty and starting to insert themselves again in indigenous people's affairs on reservations and on their land and different shit like that and whatever. And we're seeing them stripping. Now they're much further along in this process. They've been taking their children. I remember hearing a speaker in the program that I'm helping run. And she said that, they're congratulating, this is the first generation in her family where they have been able to raise their goddamn kids without them being taken. That's right. We're well on our way into something similar.
OD.
Yeah,
but, yeah,
we're well on our way. And so it says here that she talks about, in her autobiography, it's full of situations where other African Americans failed to defend the race, but it also celebrates many moments when race cooperation, either among women or between men and women, wins the day. Rather than suggesting the weakness or unmanliness of Black men for failing to protect her womanhood, in such passages, Wells demonstrates that she can protect herself, her right to a chaste woman's body, in the process of defending the race. The failure of the colored lawyer is an individual flaw, not a group indictment. This distinction between individual culpability and collective obligation to the group is crucial to the narrative structure and sexual politics of Wells' story. Now, when he mentions the lawyer, he's talking about some lawyer that didn't want to help her with her case and whatever because he was a coon. But, and a white lawyer who was down for the cause stepped in and decided to help. And she didn't take that as representative of the race as a whole, but that particular nigga. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes you gotta, sometimes niggas be like that.
Bro, I can't even imagine Twitter in her time.
Nah, this made me think of that story where that Black woman got in a fight out in the parking lot. She got into it with some white person or some white man or whatever because he was,
Oh, and she cleaned his fucking shit.
Talking shit or whatever.
And everybody's sitting here talking about, the black men ain't do, standing around not doing shit.
Oh, that
so
shit, yeah.
Here's a huge crux, and you help me piece this together by reading it. Ida B. Wells' story, helped me really piece up together a lot of the stuff that I was seeing on Twitter and shit like that, and wondering y'all have gone, certain groups have gone so far in the opposite direction and trying to find, or define womanhood and resting in their femininity
and manhood,
throwing their masculinity around and doing all of this extra nonsense in order to because for Black people, we don't really have access to all of this stuff exists in Black circles because we don't have access to gender and manhood and womanhood for real.
Well, that's not completely true. And this is what often gets confused on Twitter and everything like that, is that a lot of the time when we're hearing some of these narratives too, we're hearing it from the Black elite, except it's not as apparent to people as it was, as it is when we read a history book and we look back and everything like that. But a lot of this shit because they're the managers of the race, right? Mm-hmm. They're the representatives. So, the people, Twitter is overrun with them niggas, PhDs, doctors, and all of that other shit and whatever. And I'm not saying every single one of them is bad, so to speak, but this is still the dynamic. They're the middlemen. So it's really the rest of us that are having these we're negotiating amongst each other, but they're also trying to set a standard for the rest of us to follow. And this is what I mean, education puts you into the elite space. So even if they're still experiencing racism and they're not elite to white people, they are the elites of our particular community.
But because this is what I mean, though, we don't have access for real.
What I'm saying
because
is
in my own lifetime, it has the standard for women has changed completely. When I was a child, I remember I was in the 90s. It's a 90s kind of world. Black women, leading the way, going to college and getting a career, and they running careers, and we out here. Women stand up.
Hold on. What was his name?
Skip? No, Scooter.
Dark-skinned one.
T.J. Carson.
What was his character
T.C.
name?
Carson. Dang.
We haven't watched that in a while. We went through a whole moment where we had a moment with that.
I just seen a few episodes. Why I remember his real name and not his show name.
The dark-skinned one. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
He's fine as hell.
Yeah. But I went through that whole era, and then as I got older, coming out of my teenage years and getting into my young adulthood, I should say once I got away from the army and stuff like that, and came out into the real world, I'm seeing a total reversal. Everybody's sitting here like, oh, I want to be taken care of, and da-da-da-da, and I want to be housewife. TikTok and Twitter is just going nuts, and everybody wants to, and all the men talking about, I'm out here, I'm trying to provide and put it on my back and, be a real man. I'm just sitting here. Did I get off the train and get into the 50s? What is happening right now?
It's a lot.
Logically speaking, the average man in this country, in America, cannot provide, not because he doesn't want to, not because he's lazy, but because that shit is dependent on wages. If you have depressed wages and the federal minimum wage is $7 an hour, who's providing for anybody?
The 50-50 conversation that
Lord have mercy.
We talked about that has that kind of how it kind of comes in, because there's on average, Black men and Black women actually make about the same amount.
The same amount.
When you don't count incarcerated men. And when you count incarcerated men, it goes Black men's wages
on average, we only make $200 more, and that's because of the prevalence of more Black men that happen to be in trades.
Yeah.
That still be sexist, which never gets addressed.
These professions are gendered too. But the thing is that it's not only that, it's not just sexism that is causing that discrepancy, which a lot of people forget.
I assume there was sexism that
there is sexism.
Doing moving and stuff like that.
Don't nobody want to do that shit.
The men now don't want to be movers. But
but that's what I'm saying. It's not just sexism. It's also gender roles, because men apply for those jobs and they tend to go for those type of jobs, but they won't go for ain't no man gonna apply for a daycare unless he considers himself feminine or a certain type of thing like that.
He's not going to get it.
And it's not just because of sexism. It's because of gender roles.
He's not going to get it.
When we form these gender roles, the thing is that a lot of people, they kind of look at women's gender roles roles and they look at them as standalones. And then they look at men's gender roles and they look at them as standalones. And when they see a discrepancy in men's spaces, they say sexism. When they see a discrepancy in women's spaces, they say men are dangerous. And that's what happens.
Yeah.
And so
I can imagine the conversation if I tried to go work for the daycare.
In actuality, sexism, first of all, sexism as a concept was built on the back of racism. Let's start there.
Yeah.
And we know that from Helen Hacker's essay in her essay in the 50s, when she was saying right in the 50s, remember that was the era of massive resistance when the white women was picketing on the left and the right, and they didn't want them kids.
I'm paraphrasing.
No.
Us women are treated like slaves, like the Negro.
No, that wasn't it. That was in the 60s. That was in the 50s, sort of. Okay. But it was toward the 60s. What I'm talking about is the fact that they were picketing to keep black kids, in particular black boys out of their schools. And it was white women who were leading that charge. They were grassroots organizing. They have one of the most sophisticated grassroots organizing, like, connections and networks in the country.
Yeah, it's the PTA.
It's not just the PTA. It's the Daughters of Liberty. It's the schools they go to.
Yeah.
It's all of that. And they are not just on the right. They are on the left. They are all friends. They know each other. They go to schools. They get hit Sarah Lawrence and shit. They join sororities and all of that.
There's no really such thing as a white and left. There's a right and a left for black people. But and left be in the same family for white folk.
The reason I'm bringing this up is because when you look at certain professions, like in politics, for example, you will see that actually white men and white women have a much larger gender gap. Why is that? Some white women will just reduce it to sexism. No, it's sexism. Sometimes it is sexism, but sometimes it's because those women are choosing to put their efforts elsewhere. And that is historical, and you can find it. It is documented that there is a large amount of white women who believe that their efforts are better spent doing other things like the PTA or being a teacher, going into the schools and different things like that. Not being a teacher, but getting into higher positions like superintendent positions.
This is why, like, when you focus on when you get too focused in for whatever reason, I've read a lot of feminist texts, and they do not mention the immense power that white women wield in this country behind the scenes. If you get away from politics and realize that white women run one of the largest organizations in the country that's not a corporation, it's the PTA. Then they run all of those other corporate organizations that control where our kids go to school, whether they have to pay for lunch or not, all types of stuff that impact families all over the place. And they are on school boards. They are on fucking all types of little boards and committees and councils for towns and small government that enact white supremacy and fucking and keep us down and segregated.
Yeah.
And because you see the governor and see that, he's a white man, that's the only enemy we got. Well, what does his wife do? What does the mayor's wife do? What does the deputy mayor's wife? What does the sheriff's wife do? Nobody talks about that. I ask these questions, but that's exactly what they do.
Yeah, the thing is that I was getting at is that there's only, when they talk about women's agency and people's agency, they only talk about it in a certain context.
Certain kind of career-minded type
when you
thing.
look at politics, and this is why what some black women are saying on Twitter doesn't make sense sometimes. Black men and women kind of go into politics at similar rates depending on the region. And white women and men have a much larger discrepancy. And you can see this throughout various professions, but the one I remember the most is politics, is that white men dominate in their particular group in politics. However, white women dominate in several other arenas. And so sometimes when what we're calling sexism is actually a discrepancy, not just because of sexism directed at women, but sexism directed at men. Or in a better way of saying this, because I don't really like I don't really like to use that concept generally, because it muddies the water, because the original definition, like I said, it was predicated on the back of racism, and so it defines sexism the same way that rape used to be defined, as directed toward women, and that only women can experience it, and that's not really true. Chauvinism exists on all sides. And what it is like this negotiation of gender roles and sexual roles that is always happening. And so you can look at statistics, and the thing about statistics is that they're just numbers. It's up to the person who's reading them and shit and interpreting them to tell a story around those statistics. So some people will look at white men dominating politics and white women not, and they will say, this is because of sexism. Mm-hmm. And then some people will look at it and say, no, it can't be sexism. White women must just want to do other things. But really, it's a combination of both of those things. Both.
So just like all the other isms, sexism tends to reinforce itself, even on a subconscious level, but also on a macro, like on a micro and a macro. So a lot of white women just won't go into politics because that's something all their brothers and cousins or whatever is doing, all the men is doing. And I feel more comfortable over here. So no man is telling them, especially in this day and age, that they can't do politics. They just don't want to do it. They just don't feel comfortable. And it reinforces the same numbers. But being white, they have far more opportunity to go into politics than black women. Remember the Stacey Abrams and everybody was mad that she didn't get the governorship and everything like that.
Black people,
and it was like, she would have been the first black woman. And it was just like, okay, but if you take account into how many black governors there's been total in the entire country, there's been 46 white women or something like that have been a governor over a state. Almost every state has had a female white governor. There have been 3. Because that black man won. 3. If she would have won, she would have been the 3rd black person, period, to be a governor, period. You understand what I'm saying? So when you look at the macro, which is a larger, big picture, black people are still very much in a space of, regardless of gender, we're the first ever to do anything. We don't have we're still in a place of gender does not really matter for us because our oppression takes this, it's like 2 sides of the same coin.
I wouldn't say it doesn't matter.
It matters, but like your oppression differs based on, it's on the same side of the coin. You don't have it better because you're a woman. You don't have it better because you're a man. Your oppression is just...
There's always some negative shit.
Yeah, exactly. Your oppression just expresses itself differently.
I can see that when I'm researching.
For example, black women have access to certain types of...
scholarships,
not scholarships, but I was thinking like if you get raped or something bad happens to you,
resources,
you have certain kind of resources because you happen to share the same gender or sex as white women. Mm-hmm. White men don't have that, so black men don't either. Black men have certain types of access, kind of more really like a lottery to certain types of stuff, and then you might get it, you might not. But it'll be because you might share the same gender or sex as these white men, but it's not guaranteed. When a black woman shows up to a homeless shelter or to a rape shelter, when she gets raped or DV or anything like that, that shit is racist still. So
like when we talk about these sort of like discrepancies, and I don't know, I think we said what we needed to say about Marlon Ross and what he wrote about, not about Marlon Ross, but what he wrote about Ida B. Wells, and that she sort of like disrupted this idea of what is appropriate womanhood and, being middle class in her own way. And the idea that she, she didn't care about reputation and protecting that. And that was a really big thing for women at the time. It still is, because, sentimentalism is still present in our discourses. And so women were very much in charge of the pillow talk and the court of public opinion. And there's where women have and feminine people now have a women's sphere and have allowed certain groups that are, quote unquote, feminized, oppressed, and feminine, because these are all different concepts, right? So when I say that, it's like, okay, you have women as a group, as a categorization for certain females. And then you have people who are feminized symbolically. So that would include what people would look at as bottoms, different groups that are considered to be passive or receptive in sexual matters. Okay, let's just say it like that. And so this is what we mean when we say that it's symbolic and it's implicit in the language. This is what we mean when we say black women have been are being masculinized by their blackness. It's not saying that like they're
like
actually, it's not saying that. It's that, you know, these sorts of gendered roles and these ideas that are applied to women are made not to apply to Black women because they're Black, and their Blackness masculinizes them. And it's this particular brand of masculinity.
There's like a whole bunch of boxes that you seem to have to check. When you're a Black, like, okay, take your for perfect example to understand this is like, I look at what happened to you, your situation. You see all this all the time. Protect Black women, believe Black women. But when it comes to Black women and your station or from where you from or whatever, it's like, but not that one. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, because you didn't check the right boxes to be entitled to protection or basically to be this lady or a woman.
Well, yeah. And even so, like, it's been very interesting for me, right? Because my mom was a teacher, but she was a first generation graduate, right? So this shows how quickly Black people can just like lose their class station, like automatically. And so because my mother was abusive.
We're the only group that really happens to.
Yeah, and it's hard to get back up too. So like my mom being a first gen grad and having 2 master's degrees didn't make a difference for me because she wasn't married. That's the main reason it didn't make a difference, by the way. She was a single mother. She was a veteran. She wasn't married though. She got divorced twice. She's actually been divorced more than twice, but I don't know her life like that all the way. But she'd been divorced twice and she was abusive. So I was out on my own at 18 because she saw me as just another mouth to feed once I wasn't able to go back to college because I owed money. And so I dropped into the underclass, right? So what academics would sometimes call subaltern, right? I dropped into like the underclass because I started stripping, I started hoeing, I started like, you know, I needed to do a lot of different shit to survive, and I did. And so like, that's what, when I talk about common sense, this is one of the things that was like a thing on Twitter, is that's what I mean, because that's what I had to learn. And I was in my late teens when that shit happened, and I was on my own. When I say I was on my own, I mean, I for real was on my own. I had one friend in the city I moved to that city. The city that she originally left me in an apartment was an hour south of Indianapolis. I didn't have anybody there. I was by myself. I rode my bike at night. I didn't have a car. My bike was my main transportation. I went back and forth. Sometimes I would use my school ID because it hadn't expired yet, and I would get on the bus during the day, but they only ran to, you know what I'm saying? And so
that's like crazy. Anything could happen to you.
I found out when I was in that city that my mom moved out of the state. Didn't tell me.
Yeah, she's really
Stopped paying my phone bill, phone off. This is back in the era where there's the end of the era for payphones, right? I was using payphones to like call people and shit because like she left the state. Stop paying my phone bill.
We're aging ourselves.
We are. That's when I said I would tape. We were gonna tape. You ready to tape this shit? Like, because I remember putting songs on.
Some 19-year-old is gonna pay phone. You have to pay for somebody's cell phone. I
would hope that. I don't know. I don't be liking how motherfuckers be coming at me when they're younger than me now. Like, it's just, yeah. I don't mind congregating with people of all ages and shit like that, because when I was 18 or 19, I was, you know, hanging out with 25-year-olds and 30-year-olds, not sexually all the time, but like just kicking it because I was a stripper. And I don't mind it, but I know that like a lot of the people who are trying to comfort me weren't even on Twitter when I first got on Twitter. And
that's the funny shit.
And I know that
so
like I'll be 33.
Everything they know about you is hearsay.
Yeah, it's from cherry picking my tweets and assigning meaning to them. But anyway, let's not get into that. The point is that I love Wells because she didn't give a fuck about anybody. Like it wasn't just about reputation or anything like that. She was for real on some like, I don't give a fuck. You know what I'm saying? And because she was middle class, I think on a certain level I identify with her to a certain degree because I was raised lower middle class with a middle class mentality. And before, you know, like I said, people were telling me, no, you weren't raised middle class. Even though my mom was a teacher, you know, that conversation is going on right now, that teachers are working class conversation that's happening.
They're really trying to muddy the waters because
when I was younger, people correct me all the time. It was like, no, you weren't middle class, you were working class. So for a long time, I've been saying I'm working class, but recently we had that conversation, right? And you were like, no, honey, I was working class. You're definitely a class above. And it shows, and I thought that I was, you know, because it shows up in the way that I talk. It shows up in the way that I move, you know, maneuver socially. How you are much more friendlier than I am in a certain kind of way. The way that you do things and the way that you interact with people is much different. And I had to unlearn over time, and I didn't realize that I had done this until recently, but I had to unlearn over time my elitism.
This is the large difference between the black men that are on Twitter versus the women that are on Twitter. There's not a lot of working class black women on Twitter, or there's way more, right? There's way more middle class and up, or I'm not and working above class now. I'm lower elite. Than that, but, there's way more elite black women on Twitter versus the black men that are on Twitter.
Nah, them elite black men just be silent.
Yeah, either they don't be on either elite black men don't have social media.
I've seen them,
but they be silent because when they do open their mouth, it's like, oh, you definitely, and motherfuckers, like, people ignore them. You be quiet. Well, because they don't say nothing. But like they every once in a while, one of them says some little wild shit. Or and then like you have the celebrity intellectuals, or the ones who write books, and Cornell wants to know this is niggas like him, but our generation and shit. Every once in a while they say some cute shit. You know what I'm saying? Like my point was, like, these are the black men from where I'm from that will tell black, because this is what we tell our sisters. We work, so we can't be around you 24/7. But you're not supposed to leave the house until I come home. You're not supposed to. Am I supposed to live with my sisters?
Because she is a lady.
Right. Are you supposed to? Right. Am I supposed to live with my sisters to protect them until they find a husband? What am I supposed to do? So practicality matters, and I'm supposed to. I taught my sisters how to fight. Both of them, and even the younger one who got hands already, and I improved and upped her game because she was going to get clocked. And I taught both my sisters how to fight. And I was there for them. And so that would be me being there for them when I couldn't be there for them. Mm-hmm. My mother used to carry a hammer, a mace, all types of...
Her carrying a fucking hammer in her purse.
I'm trying to tell you.
You told me that.
But it worked. She was like, I was working for Bridget Tunnel. She would get home at 3 a.m. And New York City subway is a different world after 12. You know what I'm saying? After 10 o'clock, shit. And this lady was like 6 foot. She tried to try me on the train, and she said, I pulled that hammer out. She was like, you know what? I don't want no problems. She was like, that's what I thought. So rather than being a statistic, she pulled that hammer out, and the ball peen, you don't want to get hit in the head with a hammer.
I used to carry different shit.
The flat or the sharp side.
I used to carry different shit with me all the time because, like, I wasn't used to work. I was very sheltered. Growing up. Like, I had fights in school, and I had fights, playing with kids in the street and at parks and shit. But I had never had to really fight for, like, my safety in certain spaces and whatever. I grew up in a residential area with, like, corner stores and shit, and there was projects down the street. But I was lower middle class, you know what I'm saying? So I was on the borderlines of that. And I was very sheltered, and I had to learn how to, like, take care of myself and how to protect myself. You know how many niggas I've had to shake off in the street? I told you when I was in Chicago living by myself, when I was a single mother before I met you, or, when we was on a break, whatever, I don't remember. But I remember a nigga trying to grab me by the elbow, and I smacked that nigga and kept walking. He didn't even follow me. And if he had, you know what I'm saying, it wouldn't have been good. He wasn't a big man. He wasn't that much bigger than me. And then I seen him next door kicking it with them niggas. He knew them in passing or whatever. I don't know. They was selling drugs, so I guess he was a customer or whatever, because he was outside the gate, but they was inside the gate. And so, like, that's what I admire about Ida B. Wells, is that she was like, me standing up for myself, protecting myself, it doesn't take away less of a woman, my ladyhood or my womanhood and things like that. And but all we seem to remember about Ida B. Wells is all people seem to remember is that she was caping for black men, and that's kind of how it's presented. So we're gonna get into the Wells-Barnett, the counter feminist, that Joy James. I love Joy James, and for all those who don't know, Joy James is a preeminent black feminist writer, theorist. She writes she has a couple of books coming out this year. I know I'm copping. And this is Transcending the Talented 10th. Now, I don't know if y'all remember you want to tell them what the Talented 10th is? Okay, so the Talented 10th was the name that the elite black people gave themselves. It was Du Bois. Be specific. It was W.E.B. Du Bois dubbed. Why you keep calling him Du Bois? W.E.B. Du Bois. He said it was Du Bois. I'm correcting her. And now, ever since I did that, I keep messing his name up. You told me it was Du Bois, and now you keep saying W.E.B. Du Bois. Dubbed himself and men and women in his class as the Talented 10th. Basically, they are the
all 90% of black people ain't shit, but the 10% is the cream of the crop, and that's
they're doing everything,
and they have to do everything and manage us and carry the weight of
representatives,
and they still move like this. They was on. I remember last year, about 8 months ago, whatever. They was getting caught in little pockets. Twitter talking about, see, this is why there's different classes, and this shit right here shows that we are just not the same.
Well, they hate us.
Like they're different species of niggas or something.
They hate niggas.
But whatever. But that's what the talented 10th is. Okay, nobody gave them this name. White people didn't give them this name.
He wrote a whole little treatise on that shit.
They gave them themselves. Yeah, he named them.
A little essay.
He named them and called them the talented 10th, and it just stuck. And it was, I like that. Talented 10th, and we was like, talented 10th, my ass.
Dressed for success ass.
But this is why, and then you fast forward to today, and the descendants be on some, why y'all be hating on black folk with money? Just because I went to a prep school, or I talk with without an accent, or
Jack and Jill.
That's not why we don't like you.
Or all the arguments. This is what I mean about black elite and that shit trickling down and shit. Because
now they don't remember why we hate them.
I remember when I was on a few years ago on Twitter, and like, between 2016 and 2019, before COVID happened, I guess, niggas was arguing about fucking like fraternities and sororities like across the timeline, HBCUs versus PWIs.
This black dude wore,
and then it just kind of died out.
This black dude wore Kappa color, one of them and they was in his mentions. Oh, don't let a brotherhood member of the brotherhood see you in this. You might get checked. And then like they a gang. If y'all don't sit the hell down.
Didn't the bitch get dragged because she was wearing AKA colors
in a TV show?
And that happened, right?
Yes.
Okay, I thought it was like,
and the AKA organization threatened to sue in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, and I was sitting here like, so y'all have enough money to throw behind millions of dollars, throw behind lawyers, but not to give to these HBCUs over a make-believe fictional actress? They made me stand behind. What's that?
She was getting bullied. I remember that.
She is insufferable. Yes.
She is insufferable.
Who is it?
Some biracial.
I don't know.
I didn't watch the show. I didn't watch it either. On the timeline.
Amanda Seales. I was like, y'all made me defend Amanda Seales. Oh my God.
They did make me defend her. They did, because I was just looking at this
shit.
That shit
was so stupid.
Incidentally, side note, my mom was like blackballed by a bunch of AKAs in Milwaukee. She was blackballed, right?
Probably for good reason.
Reminding her, no, because she, and she said something about a paper bag test, but you can never tell with my mother because she's a pathological liar.
Exactly.
But I do believe she ran foul of some AKAs because the type of church we went to.
One of their husbands.
Don't be telling my mama like that.
She tripped and fell. She tripped and fell.
Now you keep my stories secret, okay? We in public.
I hate that woman.
So, we all have good reason to hate her, okay? She's very vile, but what I do know is that she did run afoul. She did say she ran afoul of some AKAs, which is one of the reasons why she wanted to leave the city. But she keeps going back there, so I don't know. She might have been lying. But I know she had some beef with a few AKAs and shit. I don't have no problem with AKAs, just so we know. I don't have any sort of affiliation with anybody. And I'm not part of a sorority. And if I was going to join Sigma Gamma Rho or Deltas. I love y'all, but I don't have no beef with AKAs. Love them. Y'all are very lovely, and I love your pink and green. But... But I will say that, like, my mom was swiftly reminded of her class and that she's not a part of the sisterhood. Remember, she got pregnant when she was 19 when she was busting it wide open at Sam Houston. So... She doesn't have the pedigree to save her. Yep, she doesn't. And she got reminded that she was working class. Now, being a teacher made her middle class, but like I said, with black folks, sometimes when you come from the lower classes and shit, you can rise up, you can fall real quick. Into the noble profession, you have to follow all the steps. Mm-hmm. She rose up, got her degrees, became a teacher, but she did not secure a husband of equal standing. Not to keep. Now, when you're equal standing would have been a business owner or another one of their brother, fraternity. But the man that she chose was he was my sister's dad. He was a cop. So she definitely had, the workings. She was on her way, but they didn't. They had a lot of violence going on in their relationship, and he was a cheater. So that's why that didn't work out. So that was on him. And, you know, saying he was young, she was young, and he was kind of a piece of shit. So that's what happened. But also, remember, she was pretending to be, you know, an Afro-Latina back then. So I don't know how long that would have lasted anyway. But
that's a whole nother story.
My whole life is a sitcom.
Her mom would be its own episode.
So we're going to go back to Joy James, Transcending the Talented 10th, and Black Leaders and American Intellectuals. And she is examining, it says here, she examines African American intellectual responses to racism and the role of elitism, sexism, and anti-radicalism in Black leadership politics. She begins with W.E.B. Du Bois's construction of the talented 10th as race managers, takes us through the work of radical women in the anti-lynching crusades, and moves on to civil rights and Black liberation movements to explore the current struggles among Black elites and academe. This is essential reading for all those concerned, blah, 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 whatever. So we're going to go into the book, and I think, what did we say we were going to do? Okay, so in this book, she talks. Okay, so let's give a little the historical background. Okay, we're gonna hit chapter 3 of Joy James, Transcending the Talented 10th, and Sexual Politics and Anti-Lynching Crusader and Revisionist Feminism. So in this book, in this chapter, she talks about a story that Alice Walker wrote. About like a fictional story about Ida B. Wells's. A descendant of Ida B. Wells, okay? So a fictional descendant, okay? It's not a real person. And to put this in perspective, in the 60s and the 70s and beyond, rape culture became a very important concept that appeared to transcend race and connect females and feminize people along the line. Like back then, it was just females. It was just women, females, whatever. And they didn't include gay people, lesbians, you know, trans people. They didn't include them as openly back then, but they were included in pockets, okay? And so rape culture became an important concept that appeared to transcend race and connect females and feminized people along the lines of sex and gender in a post-racial, colorblind era. And so, like, when we say, so, like, a lot of the time people say that they're going to divide sex and gender, and I'm kind of using certain terms interchangeably sometimes, and then I'm clarifying other times, but to be clear, because a lot of the time people aren't, when I say male and female, I'm referring to sex. So male would equal those who have small, small gametes? Yeah. Small gametes. They reproduce via sperm, and female, as I'm using it, would be those who can reproduce or generate offspring via ovum, so large gametes. So we're just referring to gametes. No, we're not referring to chromosomes, we're not referring to genitals, we're not doing any of that, whatever. We know that there's a range of what is considered male, and there's a range of what is considered female. And so that's how we're defining those things. As far as gender, when we speak gender, for me, the concept,
aesthetic or visual expression of sex or sexuality.
Well, yeah, but also the thing is that gender as a term replaced the term sex. So like, you know, like we're getting into like a real radical space, but I'm trying to keep it clear. So yeah, it would refer to the aesthetic, the visual expression of that sex or sexuality and all of that. So like, just to be clear. And so we see that Joy James talks about Alice Walker's story on page 69. It feels like we're in Bible study. And the story, let me see what the story was called. The story was titled Advancing Luna and Ida B. Wells. Now, I haven't read this story because I don't really like Alice Walker's fiction. I like her nonfiction. So I liked In Search of Her Mother's Gardens.
She's a terrible person in general.
You don't have to. Why would you say that? Now I'm going to have to edit it. We're not talking about Alice Walker. We're talking about Ida B. Wells, and she wrote a story called Advancing Luna and Ida B. Wells. And so she talks about how Wells-Barnett's daughter, Alfreda Duster, worked extensively with scholar John Hope Franklin to edit, document, and verify the accounts of this posthumously published memoir. And she struggled for 35 years before finding a publisher who recognized the significance and historical accuracy of the work. And so Alice Walker references crusade for justice to historicize her narrative in advancing Luna and Ida B. Wells. The story centers on the relationship between a white woman, Luna, and a black woman, the nameless narrator, and the narrator's relationship to her ancestor, Ida B. Wells. Walker's story characterizes the fears shaping black women's responses to interracial rape cases and the uneasy alliances between black and white women. Throughout the storyline, the narrator often offers unflattering observations of Luna while recounting their friendship, which began in 1965 when they became roommates in Atlanta as civil rights activists and ended after they left the movement and briefly roomed together in New York City. After moving into Luna's apartment, the narrator is informed by Luna that during their stay in Atlanta, she was raped by Freddie Pye, a black man. The narrator immediately thinks of the rapist revolutionary writings of Eldridge Cleaver and Leroy Jones. Sorry, I just remembered what Ishmael Reed wrote about Leroy Jones, and I started laughing. The narrator immediately thinks of the rapist revolutionary writings of Eldridge Cleaver and Leroy Jones. Imamu Baraka, why does it say Imamu? Amiri Baraka is his name, whose misogynist cruelty was habitually lost on black men, on men in general actually, but nearly always perceived and rejected by women of whatever color. That was a quote from the story. She also disdainfully recalls Pye, quote, "He was coarse and spoke of black women as our women. He was physically unattractive with something of the hoodlum about him." Okay, so those are quotes from the story. Asking Luna why she did not scream and receiving the reply, "You know why." The black woman thinks of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old black youth lynched in Mississippi years earlier for whistling at a white woman. Disturbed by Luna's revelation, the narrator begins to write a novel about such a rape. In preparation, she converses with the anti-lynching archetype, Wells-Barnett, confiding that she has read her memoir 3 times as a means of praying to her spirit to forgive me. So I'm not going to read the excerpt from the story. I'm just going to read this part here. The betrayal that weighs heavily on the narrator's conscience is truth-telling. She assumes that Wells-Barnett, feeling betrayed by writings that might contradict her own stance, will reprove the young woman for her audacious honesty. That's not all. Okay? Transferring the fearless investigation that characterized Wells-Barnett's activism onto the narrator's intellectual inspirations of the novelist, literary production supplants political deeds. Now, political courage is symbolized by a literary act embodied in the narrator's allegedly transgressive fiction. Walker's narrator neatly reduces Wells-Barnett's activism to a life spent trying to protect black men accused of raping white women from lynching.
We know what's implicitly being stated here, right? That those black men deserve to be lynched because they did that shit. That's what's being stated. Just to be clear.
That's not the only thing that's being stated, though, because...
And that Ida B. Wells was a
because Joy James mentions here that there was, in some of the most memorable cases around which Wells-Barnett agitated, the 1892 Memphis lynchings, the 1918 East St. Louis riots, and the 1917 executions of black soldiers at Camp Grant, sexual violence against white women was not alleged. Rather, racist fears against independent blacks, economic greed, and political ambitions motivated these attacks. And yet, all she is remembered for is this. You see what I'm saying, right? So then she shifts responsibility for her own naivete concerning racial sexual violence onto Wells-Barnett. I'm going to read this excerpt because, yeah. "You made it so clear that black men accused of rape in the past were innocent victims of white criminals that I grew up believing black men literally did not rape white women. At all. Ever. Now it would appear that some of them, the very twisted, the terribly ill do. What would you have me write about them?" Her answer was, "Write nothing. Nothing at all. It will be used against black men and therefore against all of us. Eldridge Cleaver and Leroy Jones don't know who they're dealing with. But you remember, you're dealing with people who brought their children to witness the murder of black human beings falsely accused of rape. People who handed out as trophies black fingers and toes. Deny, deny, deny." So that second part, she claims that in the story, the ancestor Ida B. Wells responding
This
to her.
is disrespectful.
So the theatrical exhortations uttered by Walker's Wells suggest an unrestrained emotionalism and disingenuousness among anti-lynching activists. Using the barbarity of white supremacy as the argument goes, these activists excused Black moral cowardliness in regards to sexual violence. So basically, they try to make it seem like niggas don't really care. Just like we're the most transphobic, we're the most homophobic, we're the most this. We just really don't care about sexual violence.
Again, this is a trope.
We only care about racial violence.
This is a trope that keeps repeating itself over and over and over. You look on Twitter at any given during the holidays, and it's all about, Black people are the only ones that keep family around, that be sexually abusing and all of this nonsense. And what's the gain from this? You know what I'm saying? What is the end goal of this?
The thing is that Joy James goes on and gets into it, and she talks about how, like, Wells-Barnett likely, there was a fearfulness in probing the rape issue as a race issue, yet fear did not hinder her investigative work, right? Mm-hmm. And this story, and this is this shit right here, okay? Remember when they started saying that I'm not my ancestor shit on Twitter? Mm-hmm. That's this shit right here. It allows the Black woman writer, the story allows that Alice Walker wrote, allows the Black woman writer to morally triumph over her ancestor.
As the narrator rejects Wells' fictive counsel.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I have pursued it. Some Black men themselves do not seem to know what the meaning of raping someone is. Some have admitted rape in order to denounce it, and others have accepted rape as part of rebellion, of paying Whitey back. They have gloried in it. They know nothing of America, she said. I'm starting to realize that a lot of shit that people believe about Black men, it comes straight from fiction and shit like this. Either this
remember when
or the myth of the Superwoman and the Black Macho.
Yeah.
Which
she
the
denounced.
author denounced.
But they just put out another edition.
Her own mama, the writer of some of our most beloved Black stories, Faith Ringgold, told her
the fact that Faith Ringgold is her mom.
That's crazy.
It is.
But her mama told her you ain't never been around no negative representation of Black men in your life. Where did you get this? And she had to issue a public apology. She probably had a bad exactly. And that's what old dude that you're reading. What's his name?
Marlon Ross?
No, the Lin-Manuel, the one that wrote the Lin-Manuel play about him.
Oh, Ishmael Reed.
Ishmael Reed wrote an article basically saying that they write all these theories about Black men off of one bad breakup after they've gone slumming, i.e. middle-class Black women going to the hood and dealing with, which is another thing we again see on Twitter, and then fetishizing hood dudes. It don't work out. Now she has material for her theory. They're like bad Taylor Swifts.
Mm-hmm. So then, we get into here and we talk about how she talks about Wells-Barnett's real legacy, that she likely in dialogue with the contemporary Black feminist writer would express contempt for racialist misogyny, antithetical to Black safety and beneath Black dignity. She had publicly challenged or condemned prominent Blacks and whites for any behavior she considered detrimental to Black emancipation. Remember, she was middle class. And she did so irrespective of the cost to her career and safety. So not only, the thing is that we don't often talk enough about elitism and class in Black communities, and how she was also disregarding certain class expectations of her, because there's things that are expected of her as a woman of her class from her own people. Mm-hmm. And there's things she expects from the women and men of her station from these other people. And then there's the fight to be recognized as such outside of the community. You get what I'm saying? Yet Walker's revisionism, she writes, allows the narrator a moral triumph over a denial-ridden, fearful Ida B. Wells who shields Black rapists in order to protect Black communities. And this is what that I am not my ancestors really imparts. This disrespect and this disregard for what actually happened. It's very ahistorical, and it paints them in this sort of, it paints the ancestors in sort of, it's a retroactive anti-Black impulse, I think. It's just sort of weird. And so like you'll get radical feminism that is now reduced to rad fem turfism and everything like that, when in reality, that turf shit is new. And it was added on, they added that on top, and now they just taken over the term radical feminism, when in reality, like, that term meant something else back then. And then, like, you'll see that Joy James writes about Walker's narrator extending her narrow representation of Wells-Barnett to Black women in general. And the narrator of the story says, whenever interracial rape is mentioned, a Black woman's first thought is to protect the lives of her brothers, her father, her sons, her lovers. A history of lynching has bred this reflex in her. Now, remember when I said something?
It's like you're reading this right from a goddamn Twitter thread. What is happening?
I said something about Black men because in the bullet bags thing or whatever a few months ago or whatever. Remember that bitch tried to call me a boy mom?
You can't even have a son no more. Like,
she was like, these boy moms that are done. I was like, where are you getting this boy mom shit? Like, it was like so outrageous to me. And then going on here, and she says, you know, like, Joy James writes, you know, continuing, this insight is not easily generalizable today. Not every Black woman considers the historical dangers of lynching, legal or extra legal, to be a contemporary problem. Now, obviously, police violence and different things. Not all Black women perceive all Black men with the protective sympathy they might extend to their brothers, father, sons, or lovers. And Black women who survive sexual abuse from their brothers, fathers, or lovers may have decidedly unsympathetic responses to rightfully or wrongfully accused male kin. And so, like, I'm leading, you know, like, from this statement, we're going to just discuss real briefly the personal is political, because that also became a really huge thing. A lot of us are still, like, a lot of our, you know, prominent, like, banner feminists right now that we look up to they came up during the 60s and the 70s. And some of them the 80s and the 90s, but a lot of them generally came up during the long 60s or during the 80s, right? So we talked about how, you know, rape culture became a term of du jour, you know, whatever, I don't know.
Yeah, du jour.
No, not du jour, because du jour is of the law. No, I just didn't want to say that. I was just, you know, it just popped into my head and I almost said it. But basically, you know, they, during that time period, the personal is political also became a sort of, it became a slogan, right? That was during the 60s. And the personal is the political. Another way of saying the personal is political is the private is political, right? And so there are certain racial and sexual aspects of the personal and the private. The personal or private is political. It was popularized by Carol Hanisch. She wrote an essay in 1970, and it became popularized. But she didn't coin the term. The term existed before that, and she popularized it, and that, you know, went into the 70s and 80s. That became a term that we all knew, but it was a defining characteristic of second wave feminism, radical feminism, women's studies, and it was seen as a challenge to the nuclear family and family values. Now, concurrently, we have the Moynihan report, right? So we know that this didn't actually apply, this slogan, it didn't apply to Black women, but they was in college with white women and they was, you know, just doing that whole thing, right? So this, you know, theorization of domestic labor as servitude, as slavery,
came straight out of the white woman handbook.
And it was theorized from a white female point of view. So they're like, you know, white women are slaves to our husband. And eventually they imputed that onto Black women, right? And said that, well, you know, when the slaves were freed, Black women just became the slaves of their Black husband. Mind you, niggas couldn't even stay married, couldn't get their marriages legally recognized, and were dirt broke.
That's where jumping the broom comes from.
Like, it was just a lot, you know? And so, there's a really good book on that too. It's called Bound in Wedlock, and it is by a Black feminist. So, you know, and so, because I know people be like, you know, like, there's this whole thing with this BMS shit, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
But I never stopped reading. I read widely.
Most of our library is Black feminists, mostly because BMS has only been around, since...
But also because a lot of these people on Twitter, a lot of the Black feminists on Twitter don't have no goddamn sense. And but other people do have sense, and these books are amazing. Bound in Wedlock is a really good book. But anyway, Carol Hanisch wrote an essay called The Personal is Political, and she made some comments in a 2006 forum on the women's liberation movement and like the questions about like racism and shit like that and whatever. I kid you the fuck not. This was in 2006, and she wrote this essay in 1970, and she basically, hold on, let me find this shit. But basically, the personal and the private is political was pushing back against the restriction of women to the private sphere. Okay. It was pushing back, and it was pushing back against the and saying that this is a political issue. Private female experiences that were shared between races and classes of women became like politicized, and they wanted to erode the boundaries between the private and the public. Now we all know, or we should know, that privacy as a concept in the legal sense and in the social sense is racialized to a certain extent. So again, this was not something this is something that they theorized around the white female body and white female predicament, and then imputed onto other non-white females. So this is what happened. She wrote some comments in 2006 about this, and she says that she said, I have to admit that to being a bit flabbergasted by the direction of this discussion of the personal is political as racist and or excluding Black women. I have been aware of many attacks on the what is called second wave feminism by the ensuing waves, particularly in women's studies, as white and middle class, but I wasn't aware that it was now going after some of the cornerstone ideas of our movement. All right. So then she goes on and says that she ran into it personally. Now this I got this from the Red Stockings archive. So she's saying that she ran into someone and said that her thesis was that Red Stockings was a single issue group, that because they focus on abortion, and people kind of like interpret and misinterpret the way that they want to. So we're not going to take this at face value. This is her narrative and everything. And she says when she tried to explain to her that she was wrong, she got defensive and huffy. Okay, and she decided not to give her the interview that she asked for. So then we go to the further into her comments, and she says, I can't help but wonder from whom this attack on the women's liberation movement from within the academy and other intellectuals comes from and why. And then she goes on to say that the attack on us has been so successful in large part because the truth is actually the opposite of what they claim. That is, we were and still are so concerned about race and class that we easily fall into a paralyzing state of angst over it that it precludes doing the real work of organizing anything that will actually be effective in pulling down the institutional linchpins of male supremacy or racism and capitalism. The new multiracial feminists seem to rarely engage with the various institutional basis for oppression. Then she goes on to say, this is the last part that I'm going to read.
Oh, damn.
She goes on to say, when I read the charge that the women's liberation movement was only secondarily concerned with racism, I want to say, quote, of course it's the women's liberation movement, stupid. That's her emphasis, not mine. I can't imagine anyone complaining that the Black movement is only secondarily concerned with feminism. The old bugaboo that women must always put their own needs last is still alive and well in 2006. Oppressed groups need organizations to represent their interests. The struggle to end racism needs its own organizations to do that, just as the struggle to end male supremacy does, or the struggle to end capitalism does. At the same time, these organizations have a responsibility to make equality within the organization as complete as possible.
They're ridiculous. First of all, that assumes that that assumes that all men share the same space in terms of equality, and we do not. So why would Black women be involved in a women's movement that doesn't address their Black ass issues? Because most of them don't. They're full of white women, which is why they don't have a lot of Black women in them. And white women are fucking racist. So what is she talking about? You know what I'm saying? Like,
nah, the thing that I feel like you missed this part because I'm sitting here and I'm like, she was like, of course, because it's the women's movement. And it's like, are we not women?
Exactly.
Like this, and this is exactly what's being critiqued. Exactly. And it's like, she don't even see what she's saying. Like she don't even, and she typed that shit.
Is she white?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, well, her last name is Hanisch. Yeah. Carol Hanisch. Yeah. Red stockings. She, it's like, you know, she typed that shit. And it's like, she didn't even see what she was saying. Like, she's saying it. Well, you know, Black people aren't asking other people to be, you know, care about feminism shit, but maybe we should, you know what I'm saying? Like, what? It was so weird. And it was in 2006. And Black women most definitely, you know, Black feminists were most definitely being like, we need to care about women's issues and we need to care about issues of race and sex together and different things. Like, that was happening in 2006. So for her to write that, and not see it, like, oh, this is the women's movement. This is a women's movement and not a Black movement. And then she talks later on in the same comment, she talks about how a lot of the time there is some divide because the white women are afraid that if they invite Black women into their groups, or in certain regions, Chicana women into their groups, that they will make the issue of race a whole thing.
And why are they worried?
Take away
because these
from
women
the real
are
issues.
Racist.
Even liberal, and this is liberal white women saying this too. Like they feel like that, you know, we'll come in and black it all up and make everything about race. And I'm just sitting here like, wow, like, you know what I'm saying? Hi.
It's amazing how fiction is used in place of sociological and historical research. Mm-hmm. to using fiction to discuss historical figures instead of in place of sociological historical research, and it's seen as valid. This is this is one of the main charges, and you know, I'm not a BMS scholar by any means. I was a feminist first, and that still informs much of the way the thoughts that I have about this. And so for me, BMS really makes everything a circle. And that's one of the main charges that's not getting addressed, doesn't get addressed when BMS has a critique, is that for example, the charges against Frederick Douglass being a philanderer and cheating on his on Anna Douglas is fiction. It's not based in any reality that we know of. The charges based on against MLK cheating on his wife comes from the most racist era of the FBI that we know of. Hoover's FBI. Mm-hmm. That's it. Ain't no white woman since before or since his death, in which would have garnered them fame and fortune, has ever come forward and said that, oh well, I slept with Martin Luther King. Not one. Not one. Now, there's plenty of Black women lying to their damn grandkids about how they slept with Dr. King, but nobody don't care about that. The charges of he slept with a white woman, and just like Alice Walker's book, where she uses the fictional Ida B. Wells to shield.
What's the story? To
use the she used the fictional Ida B. Wells to shield Black men from charges of abuse against white women. Like, are we serious? Like, and this is what is still happening today, and this is it's a lot.
We're gonna talk about Frederick Douglass in a different episode, but definitely she talks it, and Joy James gets into this too. What page was it? It was 73, and she talks about Valerie Smith's essay. Valerie Smith writes an essay on and retells Advancing Luna, and just sort of reduces the story, because Walker's story actually did get more complicated and questioned some of these narratives toward the end. Right? Here, take her. And she talks about how Smith's essay, Split Affinities, reviews representations of interracial rape in Walker's short story, as well as journalistic discourse surrounding the Central Park case in which African American and Latino youths were convicted for the brutal assault and rape of a white woman. With selective decontextualized passages that distort Walker's story, Smith revises the historical politics of anti-lynching activism as well as Walker's fiction to reflect on Black women's gender venality. Split Affinities uses Advancing Luna and Ida B. Wells to support its thesis that the divided loyalties of Black women create their split affinities in interracial rape cases. Smith, like Walker, notes that given the historical use of rape charges to justify racist violence, African Americans view accusations of rape as a way to terrorize innocent Black men. For Smith, this reasoning may lead to the denial of the fact that some Black men do rape.
This did not age well.
The stances...
So this didn't age well.
What didn't age well?
When
she's quoting her.
Oh, I'm saying she used the notes that given the for the Central Park 5. When Smith wrote that, they had been charged and convicted.
Well, yeah, it aged fine. This is
she's critiquing.
Critiquing the essay.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I'm saying the essay itself didn't age well because all of them got exonerated.
Yeah, but there's still a lot of Black people who don't. I'm gonna finish reading it. The stances of Black females on interracial rape cases are particularly vexed, according to Smith, who also notes that given society's greater indifference to violence against Black women, African American women's identification with white women is problematic. Okay, and so like what I was saying is that like there's still a lot of Black people, in particular certain groups of Black feminists who believe that they did that shit.
Yeah.
So I don't know. She writes here that Smith writes that as members of community under siege, Black women may well sympathize with the Black male who stands accused, while as women they share the victim's sense of violation. I wonder how, like, just a side note, how like a lot of this stuff sets up this idea that males in general are unrapeable, and how that affects people who are gender nonconforming and trans, as well as men. You know what I'm saying? Who are male, and so. Smith expands this position with a historical perspective that argues that Wells-Barnett was a counter-feminist hostile to white women abused by Black men. Smith uses Walker's fictitious characters as representative of historical and contemporary Black women. She does so without mentioning the liabilities of using contemporary fiction rather than historical or sociological research to represent the politics of non-fictional African Americans. Smith's argument has merit. In interracial rape cases, divided loyalties can reduce some African American women to reactionary counter-feminist politics, leading them to pained or vindictive positions on interracial rapes that support Black males who rape rather than their white victims. Yet their counter-progressive politics can neither be generalized to all contemporary Black women, nor facilely appended to historical Black female anti-lynching radicals. So, to make her generalizations plausible, Smith transforms Advancing Luna into black and white polemic between a venal Black counter-feminist and an equally abstract heroic white feminist. And so, like, we see this, how, like, Ida B. Wells is set up because she's set up as a counter-feminist in a lot of, and even in contemporary work. Because of the work she did around lynching, because of the work she did around the accusations against Black males, even though a lot of the, like she wrote, the notable cases were not even about rape. Nope. But she's kind of forgotten in a certain kind of way. She's not really discussed at length the way that Rosa Parks is, or other people are. They, you know, like she's not really like. She's memorialized in this particular kind of way, but she's kind of glossed over in a certain kind of way, not because of her class, but because she was middle class, you know what I'm saying? But because of the type of work that she did and the fact that people don't tend to read our narratives as a people. Even when we're the elite, they cherry pick and choose and decide who's going to represent and who isn't. And I guess it's been decided that Ida B. Wells is not going to represent, you know, or is not like the type of representation.
They consider Ida B. Wells as a mule.
Yeah, basically, I've heard that
she's muling for black men. She was a mammy and all of this other stuff, and because you don't want it's like taboo now to be a black woman and advocate for black men. And it's like they see themselves as having to protect us is problematic, or having to protect why I gotta protect black men. I'm supposed to be protected because I'm a woman.
What's that filmmaker's name?
Ava DuVernay?
Yeah, I remember there was like, she was always being asked why she didn't do work. Why was her work focused so much on black men? Why didn't she do work for around black women? And she was writing. She did a lot of different stuff about like I think, did she do a Central Park 5 documentary?
I think so. Yeah.
And I remember them asking her that around that and everything. So I think that's all, right? We jumped around, but we hit pretty much everything. And we went a little long, so we might split this episode into 2 parts. But, by chapters and everything, because, like, we re-recorded this shit. I think this is, like, our 3rd time recording trying to make it shorter. But we had these issues. Yeah, but we had these excerpts, and I really wanted y'all to hear them. I really wanted to read them. So we might just put it out the full, because it's like an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Almost, but we might just put it out. People listen to books, you'll listen to this, and we'll just split it up into chapters so you can take your time with it.
Hopefully we gave y'all a lot of stuff that y'all did not know, educated y'all a lot. We're gonna wrap this up, y'all.
Yeah, we're gonna try to keep our other episodes around 45 minutes to an hour. But we just had like a lot to sort of lay out and a lot of concepts, so we try to keep that in mind and try to shorten it next time.
Please do look up anything you can for yourselves on Ida B. Wells. She's just great historical figure. She did a lot for black men and black women, a lot for black folk. So if you're watching this on YouTube right now, like and subscribe, please. You can also listen to Struggle Love on various other platforms like Spotify, Google Podcasts, basically anywhere where Libsyn syndicates. If you want to support us financially, you can visit Thought Scholar's Patreon at patreon.com/thotscholar, where we'll also be reposting the YouTube videos for your convenience. This has been Thought Scholar, Malik, on Struggle Love. Now, stay tuned for our next episode.
The next episode that we're going to do is on Frederick Douglass, right? We're going to talk about...
We discuss Frederick Douglass and...
applying how they use fiction.
As was mentioned, fiction, poetry, nothing real, nothing he wrote.
All of that to discuss his personal life and connect him to the cheating as abusive discourse. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. The infidelity discourse. The
consistent year after year. FDR, Frederick Douglass was nothing but a cheating ass nigga discourse.
And Black History Month is coming. We're dropping these in Black History Month, so you know what's gonna come up. Because MLK, they already started.
They already did him. A whole bunch of nonsense, and white racists jumped on it and became a whole bunch. And then he became a.
There were white women tweeting about it.
He became an accomplice to a rape, and it was just a bunch of nonsense. So we're gonna get into why that is. Where it comes from, and what the history behind, what infidelity says about black men in particular. You know what I'm saying? So
thank you for listening.
Appreciate y'all.